It didn't begin with violence. It began with a voice, a question, soft enough to sound harmless, small enough to slip past suspicion. And in a world that had never known deceit, that was all it took. The serpent was the most cunning creature in the garden. Not loud, not monstrous, just clever, careful, patient. It came to the woman and planted doubt with a single line, asking whether God had really said they couldn't eat from any tree in the garden. That was the first fracture, because the command had been clear. They were free to enjoy everything around them, every tree, every blessing, every part of Eden, except one. But now the woman stood there, repeating the warning, trying to hold on to what she knew. They could eat from the trees, she said, just not from the tree in the middle of the garden. If they touched it, if they ate from it, they would die. And that was when the lie stepped fully into the light. The serpent told her she wouldn't die, told her God was keeping something from her, told her that the fruit would open her eyes, that it would make her like God, that she would know good and evil for herself. And suddenly, the tree looked different. What had once been forbidden now seemed beautiful, useful, desirable. The fruit looked good. It promised wisdom. It offered more than nourishment. It offered independence, the chance to reach beyond trust and take hold of something for herself. So she did. She took the fruit. She ate. And then she handed it to her husband, who was there with her. And he ate too. And in that moment, everything changed. Not the sky, not the earth, not the trees around them. Them. Their eyes were opened, just as the serpent had said, but not in triumph, not in glory, in shame. For the first time, they saw themselves through the lens of exposure. They realized they were naked, and what had once been innocent now felt unbearable. So they did the only thing they could think to do. They stitched fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves, trying to patch over in minutes what had just broken in the soul. And then evening came. The sound of the Lord God moved through the garden in the cool of the day, the same presence that should have brought peace. But peace was gone now. So the man and the woman hid among the trees. They hid from the one who made them. And when God called out to the man, asking where he was, it wasn't because God had lost him. It was because the man was already lost. The answer came back trembling. He said he heard God in the garden and became afraid because he was naked. So he hid, afraid. That word had never belonged in Eden before. Then came the question that cut straight through every excuse. Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from? And that's when the blame began. The man pointed at the woman. More than that, he pointed past her. He blamed the woman God had given him as if his own choice had somehow been forced into his hands. Then God turned to the woman and asked what she had done. She blamed the serpent, and just like that, the poison had spread everywhere. From temptation to disobedience, from disobedience to shame, from shame to fear, from fear to hiding, from hiding to blame. Nothing stayed untouched. Then God spoke judgment, first to the serpent. Because of what it had done, it would be cursed above every other creature. It would crawl on its belly and eat dust all the days of its life. But the judgment did not stop with humiliation. It reached far beyond that moment, beyond the garden, beyond the first man and woman. God declared there would be hostility between the serpent and the woman, between its offspring and hers. One day from her line, one would come who would crush the serpent's head, even while suffering a wound in the process. It was a curse, and buried inside the curse was a promise. Then God spoke to the woman. The path of life would now carry pain. Childbearing would be marked by sorrow. Desire and struggle would enter the bond between husband and wife, and what had been given as harmony would now be shadowed by tension, longing, and rule. Then God spoke to Adam, because he had listened to the voice beside him over the voice above him. Because he had eaten from the tree he had been commanded to avoid, the ground itself would fall under a curse. The world would no longer yield easily to him. Survival would come through hardship. The earth would bring forth thorns and thistles. Work would become toil. Bread would come by sweat. Every meal, every field, every day of labor would remind him of what had been lost. And then came the final sentence, the one spoken over every human life since. Dust you are, and to dust you will return. Death had entered the story, not as an idea, not as a distant possibility, as a sentence. The man later gave his wife a name, Eve, because she would become the mother of all the living. And even there, in the middle of judgment, life still moved forward. The future had not been erased, but innocence had. Then came one of the quietest and most haunting moments in the entire story. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them. Their fig leaves had been an attempt to cover themselves, fragile, temporary, human. God replaced them with something stronger. Even after rebellion, he covered them. Even after the curse, mercy remained. But they could not stay. God said the man had now become like one who knew good and evil, and he could not be allowed to reach out his hand, take from the tree of life, and live forever in that fallen state. So the Lord sent him out of the Garden of Eden, away from the place of peace, away from the abundance, away from the life he had been given, and into the ground he was now condemned to work. And once the man was driven out, the way back was sealed. On the east side of Eden, God placed cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the path to the tree of life. That is how paradise ended. Not with a battle, not with a storm, not with fire from heaven, with a choice. A voice in the dark, a lie dressed as freedom, a hand reaching for what God had forbidden. And from that moment on, the human story would be marked by the same pattern: desire, doubt, disobedience, shame, hiding, blame, exile. Genesis 3 is not just the story of the first fall. It is the story of every heart that has ever tried to step out from under God and call it freedom. And it is also the story of something else. Because even here, in the wreckage of Eden, before the gates closed and the sword began to burn, there was already a promise hanging in the air, that the serpent would not have the last word. The garden was lost, but the war had only just begun.